They didn't just overstep. They kidnapped my children, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. It started with a noise complaint. Just a simple, stupid complaint from a neighbor 3 houses down, an older woman who took pride in being the eyes and ears of our HOA board. She claimed my kids, ages 9 and 12, were making too much noise playing basketball in our own driveway. The ball thumped once too many times, apparently. That was Monday. On Tuesday, a handwritten citation appeared taped to my mailbox. It was covered in red ink, demanding that we cease disruptive behavior or face escalating action. I ignored it. On Wednesday, my kids disappeared. I came home from court, still in my robe and collar, to find the basketball still spinning in place on the driveway, but no children in sight. My wife was inside, panicked, assuming I'd picked them up early. I hadn't. They were supposed to walk home from the school bus stop, a straight line for blocks. Safe, quiet, residential. But they never made it home. We called the school. The kids had left on time. We called their friends. No one had seen them since dismissal. That's when the phone rang. The number was blocked. The voice on the other end was mechanical, one of those text-to-speech apps. It said, "Your children are safe. They are being held until your family complies with HOA noise regulations. This is not a threat. It's a lesson." My wife dropped to the floor. I stood frozen, every judge's instinct in my body screaming that this was more than a prank. It was criminal. I contacted the police immediately. Officers were dispatched, a BOLO was issued, and a full Amber Alert was activated within an hour. But the moment I told the officers about the HOA citations, something in their eyes changed. They looked uncomfortable, too familiar. That's when Officer Randall leaned in and whispered, "Sir, you didn't hear this from me, but this isn't the first time this HOA has detained kids." Detained? What kind of neighborhood was this? I demanded answers, but all they could legally do was search the immediate area and follow standard protocol. I wasn't about to wait, because I wasn't just a father. I was a sitting federal judge, and they had no idea who they just dragged into this. I knew I needed more than police procedure. I needed leverage. So I called in a favor. An old contact from the U.S. Marshal's office, someone I'd helped from a bench years ago, agreed to meet me that night. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table, my wife trembling in the next room. I showed him the citation, the voicemail transcript, my HOA board's contact list. He didn't say much. But when he saw the HOA president's name, Gerald Klein, his face tightened. "You might be onto something," he muttered. "This guy's been flagged before. Not for kidnapping, but for impersonating law enforcement. Misusing private security licenses." I felt my hands clench. Gerald Klein had no idea I was looking at charging him under 18 U.S. Code Section 1201, federal kidnapping. That night, while my neighborhood slept, I walked the perimeter of the HOA's clubhouse. I found cameras, motion sensors, even a gated parking lot. The place looked more like a compound than a community center. And that's when I noticed something off, a new maintenance shed around the back. Fresh paint, new lock, windows sealed. I took a picture, sent it to my contact. He responded 5 minutes later with one line, "Get a warrant. Now." By sunrise, I was at the courthouse. The moment I stepped through security, I dropped all pretenses. I wasn't just a judge looking for justice. I was a father prepared to weaponize the system. I filed for an emergency federal warrant. Kidnapping, false imprisonment, impersonation of authority. This wasn't some HOA dispute. This was a felony wrapped in HOA letterhead. The clerk raised an eyebrow when she read the supporting evidence. "You think the HOA president took your kids?" I didn't blink. "No, I know he did." She fast-tracked the file to a magistrate. 2 hours later, I had signed federal authorization to search and seize any property tied to Gerald Klein and the HOA headquarters. But I wasn't done. While the warrant was being processed, I pulled every public record tied to Gerald and his board. What I found made my stomach turn. Gerald wasn't just a power-hungry retiree. He'd been sued 4 times for unlawful detainment in different HOAs, every time under a different company name. and every time he settled out of court and moved on to a new neighborhood. He was a predator hiding behind HOA rules. I handed the folder to my contact in the marshals. His only words, "We raid tonight." At 11:17 p.m., the raid began. Four unmarked vehicles surrounded the HOA clubhouse. I was watching from a distance, heart pounding. Agents moved fast, cutting the power, breaching both the front and back doors simultaneously. Inside, they found the usual: files, surveillance screens, empty offices. But when they hit the back wall of the storage room, everything changed. It was hollow. A false wall covered the entrance to what looked like an underground storage space, one not listed in any permit or blueprint. They kicked it in. That's when we heard it. A small, muffled cry. Two voices. Children. My children. They found them inside, shaken, exhausted, but alive. There were blankets, snacks, water bottles, and a large whiteboard listing behavior correction strategies written in red marker. The room had cameras, microphones, a small speaker labeled Noise Discipline Channel. This wasn't a mistake. It was a system. Gerald didn't just take my kids, he planned to reprogram them. They found Gerald Klein in his home 2 hours later. He was in pajamas, sipping tea like it was any other night. When the marshals entered with rifles drawn, he didn't even flinch. Just raised his hands calmly and asked, "Was it too soon to act?" He genuinely thought he was in the right. That was the most disturbing part. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He asked for a lawyer and smiled as they cuffed him. Inside his house, they found journals, dozens of them. Each one had detailed notes on neighborhood children, their habits, their noise levels, their names. My kids' names were underlined. My wife couldn't even finish reading the first page. She broke down in the kitchen and had to be sedated. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. And Gerald Klein had done this before. I ordered a full audit of every HOA meeting, every complaint ever filed, every violation issued by this board. What we found next nearly derailed the entire investigation. Buried in HOA records were receipts, thousands of dollars spent on unregistered private security firms, surveillance equipment, and legal consultations with shady shell companies. Most damning, they'd written checks to something called Civic Order Operations, listed as a neighborhood enforcement consultancy. That company didn't exist, at least not legally, but it had a logo, a slogan, a badge, and the same badge was found on the arm patch of a man spotted near the school bus stop 2 days before my kids vanished. We pulled every traffic cam within 5 miles. Sure enough, there he was, black uniform, no name tag, holding a clipboard. He was directing my kids into a black SUV. This wasn't just Gerald. This was an entire operation using the HOA as cover. And worse, I wasn't the first parent this happened to. 3 days after the raid, a woman showed up at my office. She looked tired, scared, like she hadn't slept in months. She said her name was Lisa. She lived 4 blocks away. Her daughter had gone missing for a night 6 months ago, only to return the next day, saying she'd gotten lost in the woods. But something never felt right. Her daughter wouldn't speak about it, had nightmares, flinched whenever she heard garage doors open. When Lisa saw the news about Gerald's arrest, she recognized the maintenance shed immediately. Her daughter froze when she showed her the image. That was the place. But Lisa never filed a police report. The HOA told her it was an accident and warned her to stay silent if she wanted to keep her membership in good standing. She thought she was crazy. Now she knew she wasn't. And she wasn't alone. After Lisa came forward, more families followed. One father said his son was picked up by a security guard after skateboarding near the HOA clubhouse. The man claimed to be from community enforcement, said the boy violated safety rules, and returned him home hours later without explanation. Another mother recalled being fined for loitering near the playground while she waited for her daughter to finish soccer practice. Every story sounded small by itself, but when laid out side by side, a terrifying pattern emerged. The HOA had been testing boundaries for months, maybe years, small abductions disguised as discipline. Scare tactics. Manipulation. I compiled every testimony and brought it straight to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They didn't laugh. They launched a task force. We now had federal prosecutors, cybercrime analysts, and retired FBI profilers building a case against Gerald's HOA. But there was one major hole in the timeline we hadn't solved. Who drove the black SUV that took my children? Gerald wasn't there. None of his board members had alibis, and the SUV was never found. That meant someone was still out there, someone willing to grab kids off the street in broad daylight. And they weren't finished yet. 2 weeks into the investigation, one of the federal techs found something strange. A short surveillance clip from a gas station on the far side of the county. Timestamp, 2 hours after my children disappeared. A black SUV matching the description rolled through frame. No plates, no stickers, but inside, just barely visible, was a logo on the driver's chest. Civic Order Operations. Same fake group. Same ghost company. Same patch. But the twist? The SUV wasn't registered to Gerald Klein or the HOA. It was linked to a private contractor based 2 states away, licensed for facility management and civil mediation. The company was tied to a man named Walter Brink, a former paramilitary contractor with a revoked license and a long history of shady private security work. We finally had a name. Now we needed to find him. Because Gerald Klein may have orchestrated this insanity, but Walter Brink, he was the one executing it. We started digging into Brink's last known whereabouts. His license had been pulled 3 years ago after an alleged overreach while guarding a mining facility, though charges were dropped after the evidence vanished. Classic, but one record slipped through the cracks. He'd purchased property under a Shell LLC out in a rural area just over the state line. Secluded, off-grid, the kind of place no one stumbles across by accident. The marshals prepped for a second raid, this time across state lines, with full federal authority. But the night before we were scheduled to move, I got a package on my doorstep. No postage, no name. Inside, a photo, my kids, in the underground room, and a handwritten note. This isn't over. Judges don't make rules here. We do. My blood ran cold. Brink was watching us. Watching me. We didn't wait. At dawn, the task force rolled out in armored trucks, sweeping across the state border and descending on Brink's compound. The place was fortified, steel gate, reinforced windows, surveillance cameras tucked into trees. It was clear this wasn't just a hideout. It was a training site. They found racks of uniforms, fake ID badges, binders of enforcement protocols, and hard drives filled with neighborhood blueprints from across the country. This wasn't just about our HOA. Brink had built an entire franchise of fake authority designed to infiltrate HOAs, install loyal boards, and control entire communities under the illusion of legality. It was domestic manipulation dressed as neighborhood policy. But Brink was gone. He'd cleared out just hours before the raid, left everything behind except a single note on the wall, scrawled in red ink. Not the judge, not the law, the people. After the raid, I returned home, exhausted, angry, more protective than ever. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that message. Not the judge, not the law, the people. What people? The next night it came. Another block call. Another robotic voice. You found one. There are more. I recorded it, traced it, ran every digital fingerprint I could. Nothing. I called the marshals. They couldn't track it either. The signal was bounced through so many VPNs and proxy routers, it could have come from anywhere. Whoever these people were, they were organized, and they weren't just targeting me. They were in neighborhoods across the country. Maybe yours. Maybe your neighbor is watching for noise. Or your HOA president's running drills behind closed doors. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 3 days after the second raid, I got a call from the Justice Department. They wanted me in Washington. A task force of federal prosecutors, domestic terrorism analysts, and cybersecurity specialists had been quietly watching this HOA corruption unfold, not just in my case, but in dozens of states. Turns out, Brink wasn't alone. He had a network. More than a dozen HOAs in 8 states had quietly signed contracts with third-party civic enforcement agencies. All of them used shell companies. All of them paid by the same LLC that traced back to Brink's old corporate office. And every one of those HOAs had documented incident reports about disciplining children, locking community gates, and even detaining non-residents. They were creating private fiefdoms inside American suburbs. My story was just the loudest one. A senior official at the DOJ said something I'll never forget. This isn't an HOA issue anymore. It's a shadow governance issue. And you're the judge who lit the match. The night before we were scheduled to depose one of the former HOA board members from Brink's inner circle, he vanished. His name was Adam Morse, a mild-mannered accountant who had worked under Gerald Klein for years. He'd agreed to flip and testify in exchange for immunity. We placed him in a federal safe house, guarded 24/7. And yet gone. No signs of forced entry. Cameras wiped. Vehicle untouched. The only clue was a note found under his pillow. Silence buys peace. Speak, and we erase more the names. His disappearance hit the entire investigation hard. The media got wind of it, and suddenly, reporters were swarming every HOA in the country with a clipboard and a camera. Good. Let them panic. But I knew the truth. We weren't dealing with just corruption anymore. We were staring at the face of a well-funded, highly trained domestic network willing to vanish people who talk. And I was next on their list. A week later, my daughter's school went into lockdown. An unmarked van was spotted idling near the back entrance. No plates, no driver seen. Left minutes before security arrived. Inside the van, parked half a mile away in an abandoned gas station lot, investigators found a clipboard. It listed names. My daughter's was at the top. My son's was second. Both names had check marks. I wasn't just being watched anymore. I was being studied. Surveillance footage showed the same man seen near my neighborhood weeks ago. The black uniform, the fake badge, the earpiece. Brink's people hadn't disappeared. They were reactivating. And I was starting to believe something terrifying. This entire network wasn't just about control. It was about recruitment. And our children were at the center of it. We went back to the footage from the underground room where my children were held, the one behind the false wall at the HOA clubhouse. A federal analyst noticed something we'd missed. The red writing on the whiteboard wasn't just behavior correction strategy, it was a pattern. Every fourth letter was written with a different pen, barely noticeable. They decoded it. It formed a sentence. Brink is not the head. Brink is the blade. He wasn't running the show. He was just the enforcer. That meant someone higher was out there. Someone with deeper access, more influence, enough power to finance this operation across state lines and wipe surveillance data without a trace. We called it the architect, but we had no name, no face, only one possible source left to ask, and she hadn't spoken in over a year. Her name was Ella Quinn, just 15 years old. She was the first documented minor to go missing and come back after a disciplinary extraction by one of Brink's HOA-linked teams. Her family moved away in secret. She hadn't spoken a word since the incident. Doctors called it trauma-induced mutism. Nothing worked. But when her parents saw the news of Brink's raids and Gerald Klein's arrest, they reached out. We brought her in gently, privately. No cameras. Just me, 2 child therapists, and her mother. At first, she stared out the window, silent. Then we showed her a photograph of the whiteboard. She blinked. Her lip trembled. Then, for the first time in over a year, she whispered, "He wore a badge that didn't shine." We asked her who he was. She pulled out a pencil and, with a trembling hand, wrote one name, Wes. We had never heard of a Wes. But Ella had just cracked open a door no one else could touch. Ella gave us our only real lead. Wes, one name, one clue. We cross-referenced every HOA board in every community linked to Brink's operation. Nothing. No Wes on file. No Wesley on record. Not even in the shell companies. But Ella wasn't done. She remembered one more thing. Wes always arrived late at night, never in uniform. He wore gloves. And he never spoke above a whisper. She said his badge was different. Not shiny, not metal, but leather, worn. She drew it from memory. We scanned the design and ran it through law enforcement databases. No match. But then we tried private contractors, security firms, defunct agencies, militia organizations. And finally, we hit something. A now defunct entity called Westfield Enforcement Solutions, WES. It wasn't a person. It was a system. And the founder? A man named Clayton Ress, who legally changed his name and vanished 6 years ago after being accused of human rights violations while operating overseas. He was the architect, and he had rewritten himself as Wes. We dug deeper into Clayton Ress. Turns out he'd been quietly buying land all over the country, targeting neighborhoods near government buildings, courthouses, and even military installations. But his purchases weren't in his name. They were made through trust funds, HOA holding companies, and real estate shell core. We finally cracked one open, registered in Montana. Inside were files labeled, Next Phase, Indoctrinate Youth Test Compliance. HOA-level deploy units, suburban integration. It was worse than we imagined. Brink was the blade. Wes was building the army. He was using HOAs as testing grounds for authoritarian control and kids like mine as training subjects. We weren't stopping a rogue HOA anymore. We were staring at a domestic grooming network disguised as neighborhood management. The FBI officially upgraded the case, and I officially stepped off the bench to join the fight. We launched Operation Quiet Ground in coordination with the Department of Homeland Security. It was the largest suburban infiltration investigation in modern U.S. history. 37 communities, 12 states, dozens of arrests. We moved fast, searching clubhouses, seizing hard drives, questioning board members, freezing bank accounts. Some cooperated. Most didn't even know what they were a part of. But one name kept surfacing on internal messages, Wes_relay. It was a burner account used to distribute orders to HOA leaders, assigning noise violations, directing interventions, and identifying which families resisted compliance. That meant this wasn't over. Wes was still out there, and he was still communicating. But now, the eyes of the country were watching. 2 months later, we found him. A cabin in the Colorado wilderness. Off-grid. No electricity. No phone. No internet. But Wes didn't run. He stood outside when we arrived, arms folded, like he knew we'd come. He only said one thing, "You can tear down the walls, but you already let us in." Then he handed over a hard drive. It was encrypted, government grade. We broke it 2 weeks later. Inside were recordings, HOA board meetings, children in re-education sessions, fake security officer drills, and one final file, Phase 3. Courts, that's when I realized I hadn't been targeted just because I was a parent. I was targeted because I'm a federal judge. They wanted control of neighborhoods, then children, then laws. It started with a noise complaint. It ended with a plot to hollow out democracy from the inside out. Today, my children are safe. So, are dozens more who were taken, silenced, or manipulated under the shadow of HOA discipline. Gerald Klein is in federal prison. Walter Brink is awaiting trial. And Wes? He's off the grid again. This time under government monitoring, stripped of any legal power. But the scars are still here. I still watch every van that drives by, still keep the gate locked, the cameras running, still wonder how many communities are one vote away from turning into a cage. Because the next Karen might not just complain about noise, she might be recruiting. If you think the HOA went too far and you're glad this judge fought back, hit that like button. Subscribe for more true stories where justice isn't just served, it's personal. You won't believe what's coming next.